Mr. Butler, good morning.
Well, good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so I wanted to bring in one topic here, and it is the issue of domestic violence. And initially, the governor had proposed that if somebody is charged with any part of domestic violence, that they'd have to forfeit all of their guns. This has been modified, I believe, and this new law would mean that if you're convicted, you not only have to turn over your handguns, but you have to all guns have to be turned over. Is that the case? And what is your thought on that?
Well, yes, this legislation has gone through a number of iterations, and there's certainly some logic to it if you're convicted of harassment or something like that with a family member. But I think at one point they were talking about even if you were charged.
Yeah, there'd be no due process.
Yeah, there was no due process, and we had some concerns about that. The topic is in the news every day, and it's certainly something that needs to be looked at and some attention. But I think some of this stuff goes way too far.
Yeah.
And and again, attack on the Second Amendment rights.
What is your? Of course, he was being heralded. The governor being heralded yesterday by Nancy Pelosi over his tough gun laws. And when people talk about gun laws, we have some of the toughest in the country.
We have the toughest laws. The question is, how effective are they? Yeah. I think the governor is clearly positioning himself, and there's talk about him interested in running for the presidency a few years down the road. I think he's positioning himself as an anti-gun individual and politician, and that's something that he keeps coming back to. It may work in some parts of New York State, but if he's looking at running nationally, I'm not convinced this is going to put him in a good light.
Well,
we'll see how that plays out.
One of the stories it's come out of Albany, and I'd love your take on this, and it's in line with guns, is the governor's memo telling banks and insurance companies not to do business with the NRA.
That's I found that to be highly offensive. Using a state agency like that to carry out what is his personal vendetta against the NRA. Look, the way the memo is constructed, number one, and certainly every rational person is outraged and shocked by all of these shootings, particularly at the schools. But then, the progression is, well, these things happen, and it's a result of guns, and the NRA supports guns and the Second Amendment, and therefore you shouldn't be dealing with them in a business manner. I don't think that's a logical progression. I just think it's overreach by the government, and I thought the memo was vaguely threatening. We oversee these activities, and you have a social responsibility not to do these things. I think there was an implied threat that we're going to keep an eye on you. I liken it to, let's say a codes enforcer comes up to you at your house and said, I don't like what you're doing. It's not illegal, but I'm going to be keeping my eye on you. You wouldn't feel that was kind of
you kind of feel like
watching you.
Yeah, you feel like they're going to find something sooner or later.
Yeah,
right?
Right. So I just think that was overreach, governmental overreach, and I found it to be pretty offensive, and I think many of my colleagues did too.
How much do you feel is this? Because he's been very quiet on guns since the SAFE Act. There's a lot of backlash on the SAFE Act. So the governor had been pretty quiet. Obviously, he speaks out after every shooting. But how much is this to do with Cynthia Nixon, who's really driving the conversation farther and farther to the left?
Well, you're absolutely right. She is pushing the governor to try and polish up his liberal credentials, his progressive credentials. I guess progressive is the new word. And it's interesting to watch this play out. He's in a bit of a bind. But I'll tell you, even to this day, when was the SAFE Act implemented? 2013. And as I drive around my district, I still see numerous signs, stop the SAFE Act, and, the circle with the line through it for the SAFE Act. So I think I'm not sure that it played out the way he expected. He kind of thought that things would be down, but there's still a lot of hostility, a lot of anger about that, and most of all, the way it was done, in a few hours, a far-reaching law like that. You can't tell me they weren't thinking about that for months. Sure. There were no public hearings, no vetting, no looking at that law. So I think, just the way it came about is offensive.
The other thing he went quiet. I know your wife has been in education. The other thing he's been very quiet about is, if you remember a few years back, he just felt he was invincible and went after teachers. He's been extremely quiet on the education issue.
A deafening silence. Yeah. Yes, we are probably going to be looking at some legislation dealing with this APPR, the review process for teachers and administrators. I think that's coming through the pipeline now, and I think this is finally going to get a discussion. I think there were a number of flaws with what was going on. As members of the Republican conference, we held a number of public forums on this, parents and students and teachers and school board members, and some of the stories were absolutely shocking about the stress this put the kids under. The time it took away from normal classroom activity. It's just it was a mess. It was a mess the way it was introduced. It was something that I think is a proven failure. And
at the end of the day, you had people saying, "Well, this is ridiculous. Teachers aren't teaching anymore. They're teaching to the test. This is so wrong." The problem is that this prompted schools to do that, because if you didn't do well on the tests, your school was penalized, and so were the teachers. So, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what the result was going to be, and it's exactly what happened. So,
my belief is there are a couple of ways of learning. I think schools and teachers need to teach kids how to think, not to parrot back answers to questions that are formulated ahead of time. I mean, that's rote learning, that's memorization, but it's really not creating an environment where students are trained to think on their feet and figure things out on their own.
Pretty big, Marc Butler. We appreciate it. Thanks so much. And
all right, Bill, anytime.
Talk again soon. Enjoy your time there.